welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. The world strategic ideological picture is in motion. The crust of a quarter century is breaking apart, and we've got important moves on the Russian front, on the Vatican front, and in other forms that indicate that there are openings for hope and action in the current world. And as we speak to you, it's the 150th anniversary of the second day of the Great Battle of Chickamauga in northwest Georgia. That is the second most costly battle of the entire Civil War. It is second only to Gettysburg a couple of months earlier. And it is, of course, out of this battle that we get George H. Thomas of Virginia, a loyal Virginian who won the title of the Rock of Chickamauga. He later went on to become the Sledgehammer of Nashville, destroying Hood's army on the battlefield. And the interesting angle, as so often in the Civil War, on his way to becoming the Rock of Chickamauga, Thomas got help from a Russian general, a Don Cossack in his army. That is General John Basil Turchin, a veteran of the Crimean War who had come to the United States and who saved the day not once but twice at Chickamauga with well-placed counterattacks. And that, of course, leads us into the anniversary next Tuesday, September 24th. It is the 150th anniversary of the arrival of the Russian fleet in New York City, just in time after that terrible summer of Gettysburg, Vicksburg, the draft riots, and then Chickamauga. Terrible casualties in all of those, or most of those events, Gettysburg and Chickamauga especially. And it was then at the moment when things seemed pretty dark that the Russian fleet arrived, causing U.S. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles to say, "Thank God for the Russians. God bless the Russians," literally. So the debt of honor will be acknowledged, and that will occur at the National Press Club on the evening, the precise anniversary of Tuesday, September 24th, and that will be at 7 p.m. in the evening. So if you're anywhere near Washington, D.C., please come. Please make a tape. Put it on the Internet. We're going to need that. So that is the current overview. Now, we've got to look, first of all, at the struggles around Syria. As of this morning, the Syrian government has met the somewhat artificial but deadline of 1 week from the meeting, the Kerry-Lavrov meeting in Geneva last Saturday. They have met that with time to spare. They have delivered a report outlining, giving an overview of the Syrian chemical weapons, poison gas arsenal. And they have delivered this not to Mad Dog Kerry of Skull and Bones, but to the proper international authority, the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, which is located in The Hague, the Netherlands, right? Den Haag. So the Syrians have met the deadline. That's important because otherwise Mad Dog Kerry, foaming at the mouth, would be capable of demanding a world war as the price for missing the deadline. So he won't get that chance. And now, of course, the attention of the world shifts to New York, to the United Nations. Next week, starting on Monday and Tuesday, we're going to have the annual session of the United Nations General Assembly. This is bad for the imperialists. You're going to get a lot of ambassadors, you're going to get a lot of diplomats, envoys talking, and this ugly, aggressive, imperialistic, neo-colonialist line emanating from London and Paris, the Suez powers of 1956, the Sykes-Picot powers of World War I, dragging the United States in there as the tail on the Anglo-French kite. And I think that's going to generate a moment of revulsion and rejection in world public opinion against this absurd neo-colonialist enterprise. We'll even talk about the attempts of the Kerry State Department to harass representatives of sovereign states getting in there, right? The Kerry State Department is trying to prevent the Venezuelan foreign minister from coming with harassment. Look how low this Kerry, this mad dog from Skull and Bones, is willing to stoop. Why is he still in office? He should have been fired, impeached long ago. Naturally, he's so shameless, he'll never resign. He's got to be ousted and sent back to his windsurfing so he can be for things before he's against them. Anyway, enough of Kerry, Skull and Bones. That is now coming. And, of course, the big issue now basically revolves around the United Nations Security Council resolution, which the U.S. and France and Britain seem to think is needed in this case. I don't see how it's needed. It's not needed because the attempt here is obviously to create a veil of legality and legitimacy for something that remains a policy of the threat of force, which violates all sorts of treaties, right? The United States is violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nuclear states are not allowed to threaten non-nuclear states. You're violating your own anti-proliferation regime. Don't look now, State Department. So that's going on. There is no need for a resolution. If resolution there must be for tactical reasons, the main imperative is no reference to Chapter 7, nothing about threats to international peace and security that have got to be answered by military action and or further killer economic sanctions. In other words, the enforcement mechanism cannot be provided in the resolution. And actually, of course, the U.S. is always making threats off stage, right? Give us what we want or we'll attack, we'll bomb. That is probably less realistic now that Obama has faced the gaping abyss of a humiliating defeat in the House and in the Senate, too. But still, there's an attempt now to cover that over by getting back to military action through the back door. All of these people, Kerry, Susan Rice, Samantha Power, fire every one of them. They're failures. They're amateurs. They're bunglers. Compared to Lavrov. Lavrov looks like the new Richelieu, and these people look like absolute bunglers. And then the central issue then becomes, as part of that struggle, who, pray tell, used the nuclear weapons? Now, here in the land of the direct apologetic, we might say, it's simply lying, right? The U.S. just lies. Obama was on the radio a week ago saying that nobody out there in the world believes that the rebels used nuclear weapons. Well, no, it looks to me like the biggest country of landmass, Russia, and the biggest country by population, they seem to think that there's something to that. And we've got in the paper this morning the U.S.-Russian agreement on Syria's chemical weapons on shaky ground Thursday the 19th of September, i.e. yesterday, because, Kerry says, there are efforts by some to deny Syrian government responsibility. We'll be back to elaborate on that in just a second. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., reminding you that the 150th anniversary of the visit of the Russian fleet to New York Harbor will be marked and commemorated and gratitude expressed on Tuesday, September 24th at 7 p.m. at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on 14th Street, not so far from the U.S. Treasury. You can find it. Metro Center. So will there be a UN Security Council resolution? Strictly speaking, not needed, but no Chapter 7. Don't let the imperialists and colonialists and aggressors get what they couldn't get from their own national parliaments, which is some veneer of legality, respectability. Don't give it to them. And therefore, in that context, everything focuses on the report now by the UN inspectors and the epistemological battle. Who did this? The U.S. and the Suez gang, call it Suez plus one. Again, that appropriately puts the U.S. as the tail on this Anglo-French imperialist kite of Hague-Fabius, Cameron, and Hollande, right? The Vichy meet the Colonel Blimps. It's sort of the 1940 losers society once again. But in any case, the question, therefore, is who did it? And the U.S. had tried very hard to say, this is an open and shut case. We don't need any proof. We have proof. We show it to congressmen. We show it to governments, but we're not going to show it to you because that would reveal our wonderful methods of collection and all this other stuff. Who believes them? Since the days of Colin Powell at the United Nations, nobody in his right mind believes these people. And I have to laugh in rage when I see these pompous commentators on cable news. Oh, how can we believe Putin? How can we believe Assad? Well, who's got the biggest track record for lying, pray tell? Colin Powell, the State Department, the U.S., Bush, Cheney, the neocons who raised lying to a theoretical exercise of exquisite refinement. They're the ones who did this. And now they're saying, let Putin submit proof. Wait a minute. You're the one who made the charge, and you never submitted any proof. Oh, imperialists of the Suez plus one. Now, a lot of it focuses on the report by the UN inspectors, which was released this week and, was submitted to the parties, to the powers. And here we don't find accusations. There's no attribution of guilt one way or the other. It doesn't say who did it. But Kerry and his gang of warmonger sycophants of skull and bones vintage are claiming that the inspector's report shows that the Assad regime did it, right? Read between the lines and you'll get the idea because of the type of weapon used and the place from which these weapons were allegedly fired. I am sorry, that does not cut the mustard. You are in a hyper-determined atmosphere. In other words, everything about this is manipulated, faked, it's massaged, it's cooked, it's fixed from every conceivable point of view. So the type of weapon and the place when fired. Please take a nice look at Tarpley.net, and I've been trying to highlight for the benefit of people here in the West a series of articles that appear in some of the, what can we call them, institutchiki organs in Moscow, which are analysts and experts, not quite at the level of the Russian Academy of Sciences, maybe one step down, but still highly qualified people. And they're writing about this. Let me just give you the quick lowdown on one of them. This is the NEO magazine, published in Moscow, and New Eastern Outlook. So here we have Pyotr Lvov, and his very short analysis. I urge you to look at it. It's on Tarpley.net. The Russian expose of the Syrian chemical attack says the money came from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, Riyadh and Doha. The Obama White House approved it, or at least in these circles it was circulating that the Obama White House had green-lighted, as they like to say, these events. The British were the main organizers. Perfide Albion manipulated everybody. They organized it. supply of chemical weapons came from Libya, because Libya has Soviet vintage chemical weapons, still some, of the type that would be used and then pinned on Assad. And the entire thing was carried out by Ukrainian mercenaries. How about that? So we've got Saudi Arabia, Doha, the Obama White House, the British, Libya, Ukraine. And, of course, the Libya part might be the kind of thing that Ambassador Stevens was doing when his luck ran out, cavorting with those terrorists and getting weapons shipped in there, right? And it would have been, some of it might well have been shipped in through Turkey, because we know that some rebels were arrested in Turkey with 2 kilograms of sarin gas. And, of course, we got, as we've outlined in earlier broadcasts, we've also got the other story from Mint Press, from the AP stringer there, Associated Press stringer, which is that this was a Saudi network controlled by Prince Bandar delivering the tubes of chemical weapons, and then they went off. And I don't think that account is conclusive about how it went off, but that a Saudi intelligence officer on the ground, a militant, a Wahhabite, was there, and then the gas went off. So we've got all that. Notice that Russia has actually proposed that they could help transport the chemical weapons to the appropriate place where they're going to be wiped out. So once that UN report came out, you had Putin, Lavrov, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, pointing out that there is no attribution of guilt. And Kerry, of course, rushing to try to pin it all on Assad. Now, in terms of who provides proof, let's just remember, Russia has provided, at least to governments, and I think only to governments so far, the thing written up by McClatchy, which was the 100-page report on the Aleppo March chemical weapons event, which is conclusive, meticulous, according to all the rules of evidence, chain of custody, everything like that, and the rebels did it. I also call your attention on my website. We've got the report by Sister Agnès Mariam Delacroix of the Monastery of St. James, who says that it's a fake and the children were kidnapped from Latakia. We'll be back in a minute on that on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley, Washington, D.C. Come to the National Press Club on Tuesday evening, September 24th, this coming week. This week, 7 p.m., the 150th of the Russian fleets. I did make a speech at the 9/11 conference in Pentagon City last Saturday that hopefully will be up sometime this week. And I'm still hoping for my speech from the Million American March Against Fear, although originally known as the Million Muslim March on the Mall. Hope to get it, and if I do, I'll put it up. Otherwise, it means I don't have it. Sister Agnès Mariam Delacroix has analyzed in tremendous detail the Goutha videos, the ones that were pushed by the Obama White House, the CIA, the U.S. media. She finds overwhelming evidence of fabrication and fakery. And you can see this report. We've gone to a lot of effort to revive the links. In other words, the report is full of links to these videos, and some of those were broken. There was actually a systematic attempt by the dark forces to take down these videos, which are the things that can be critiqued and therefore refuted. And, of course, you have things like a child shows up in one video dead at a certain time, and then later on that same child shows up as not dead but ill and so forth. There's no sign of parents. Most of them are boys. There are no funerals shown. The entire atmosphere is fake, set up. These are poses. These are fabricated videos that are part of a pre-planned provocation. There's also the problem of how did they get all these videos up within 2 to 3 hours after the event itself was supposed to occur. It makes no sense. And the centerpiece, and she's going to get more on this, Sister Agnès Mariam de la Croix of St. James Monastery, Kara, between Homs and Damascus, points out that there were kidnappings of Alawite children, especially Alawite boys, from the Latakia area, and some of those children appear in multiple photos in the chemical weapons videos that were used to create this worldwide furor. So this entire fraud, a constructive fraud on world public opinion, is falling apart. The fighting goes on at Malula, the area where Aramaic, language of Jesus Christ, is still spoken, where these full of contempt for Western media, but Western public opinion, the jihadis, the killers, the terrorists, were attempting to control the city. They've been driven back to a mountain fort where I'm confident they will be they'll be finished off. It looks a little bit like Monte Cassino. They're going to be mopped up. Then we have this other very interesting thing in Azaz, terrorist fratricide. We have the Free Syrian Army, an emanation of the Syrian National Coalition now, against the Nusra Front. Nusra is winning, but then they have a ceasefire. These are large battles going on over several days, and look how they kill each other. They kill each other with reckless abandon. Could anybody doubt that the Farouk Brigade, for example, of the FSA, of the wonderful pro-Western ones, were capable of launching a chemical attack against Syrian civilians? Or if some Nusras got in there or some other brigade, what do they care? It's all part of the greater cause of creating a failed state, of creating warlords and emirs and putting their benighted social theories into practice. So if they kill each other like that, they're capable of anything. And of course, there's a conflict here between the Ottomans, the neo-Ottomans, the Turks who want to make this part of the new Ottoman Empire, the Saudis who want it to be the Wahhabite access to the Mediterranean direct, and of course the Qatar people who want the same version as a pipeline. So right now, Turkey claims to have closed that Azaz border crossing, but of course we know that the Turkish frontier is very porous. If you're a terrorist, you can get across there very easily. Now, into this, we got to mix in this Navy Yard effect, right? The Aaron Alexis. And I'm not going to go through a lot of details because a lot of it is very clear. This is a staged event. We have 3 shooters. Take a look at my Twitter feed. I was able to live blog this to some extent. Until the FBI took over the investigation at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there were 3 shooters. There were details about them. There were descriptions. There was a black guy with gray sideburns. There was a white guy. They were able to tell you, look, white guy, 45 to 50, khaki or tan, wearing a beret with a handgun. Then a black guy between 40 and 50, 5'10", 180 pounds, gray sideburns, dressed in olive drab with a long gun. 3 shooters. I'm sorry. And then, of course, it disappears. As soon as the FBI comes in, the FBI says, we only do lone assassins. We need Oswalds. We can't have conspiracies. Out the door it goes. And, of course, the red flag's ignored, right? This is a person who should not have had a gun, should have been denied a gun license. He should have been deprived of any secret security clearance. It's unbelievable that he was hired. It looks like he's hired through a check. His vetting was carried out by the same company that vetted Snowden. Is that possible? Take a look. Anyway, and of course, all of these incidents, he should never have been working there. Remember, a secret security clearance can be taken away for just about anything. A couple of traffic tickets, personal financial difficulties, domestic, some kind of a clash in the home. The guy shot out car tires. He had anger blackouts. We've got another one this morning. He started screaming at a family in an airport when they were 40 or 50 yards away because he thought they were denigrating him. They were laughing at him. So he screamed at them, screaming obscenities, and the management wouldn't do anything about it, right? No gun, no clearance for this character. He's a patsy. But the important thing is why. I'm always dismayed by the primitive stupidity of an analysis that says, "Oh, this is to take your guns away." No. This is firmly embedded in the great struggles that are going on. This is a warning to Obama. This is a threat to Obama. This is not Obama doing something of this type. This is something to Obama. This says, "Dear Obama, we're the invisible government. We're the rogue network. We're the parallel government. We don't like you now. We want war with Syria. Give us our war with Syria, or you'll be in big trouble." That's essentially the message. We're not happy. We wanted that war. Give us our war. And then, second aspect, with all of this bungling, right, with all this astounding stuff, and this, of course, it's all done in a very simple way. All the normal checks, the normal exclusions, the normal mechanisms can be overridden. You put a national security override on it. You need one mole at a high position in some of these bureaucracies, and he can just say, "I'm flagging this guy as a national security override case, and none of the usual stuff is going to touch him because we have secret reasons that you're not allowed to know why this must be the case." That is what was done with Mutalab. Remember the meeting, the interagency committee meeting, where the State Department said, "Okay, this is enough, we're going to pull his visa," and a still unnamed agency, according to Secretary Kennedy, an unnamed agency said, "No, we have eyes on him. We want to follow him. National security override. He keeps his visa." Same story. We'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Now, as we've been doing now for several weeks and will continue to do through the date of the general election, that is the November 5th and certainly thereafter, we want to get an update on the big political motion going on domestically here in the United States. That is the Tax Wall Street Party making its debut, and we're better than Broadway. It's a debuting in the Big Apple with Randy Credico running for mayor now, did very well in the Democratic primary on September 10th, but we're now headed towards the general election on November 5th. Now, this is a totally different geography, right? The geometry of the general election is quite different from the election inside the Democratic Party, which is now over. The candidate to beat is, of course, de Blasio, the Soros clone, getting support of all the limousine liberals and Learjet liberals. And the alternative is certainly not the reactionary Republican, but rather Credico. So let's go to the top campaign official, Daniela Walls, to get an update on what's going on. Daniela, welcome.
Hi, Webster. The latest Quinnipiac poll has de Blasio at 66% to LaHoda's 25%. So this is a blowout of all proportions. So LaHoda's not even a threat. It's going to be between the independent candidates and de Blasio. It may get tighter with LaHoda, but I can't see LaHoda winning this. And there's also no danger of Randy being tagged a spoiler now, because de Blasio has such an overwhelming lead. John Catsimatidis, who ran against LaHoda and came close to him in the Republican primary, has decided that he's removing his two tickets from the independent November ballot. He's removing his Liberal Party ticket and his Jobs ticket. The New York media didn't cover it, but I confirmed it with his campaign. So that is two less independent lines in November. Then George McDonald, who's the other Republican, said he hasn't made a decision yet whether he's going to run to continue with his independent common sense ticket. Word is that McDonald isn't going to continue either, but I haven't confirmed that yet. So here's the rest of the field that we have to be concerned with. The other two independent lines, besides our Tax Wall Street Party line that will get any attention, are going to be Jack Hydery, the computer tech multimillionaire entrepreneur with his Jobs and Education Party, and Adolfo Carrion, who is Lenora Fulani's candidate running on her Independence Party line. Bloomberg gave the Independence Party $1.2 million during his 2009 campaign. The Independence Party provided the margin of victory in 2 out of 3 of Bloomberg's elections. A lot of people each election, Webster, pull the lever for the Independence Party in New York because they think, oh, cool, it says independence. But that party is not what you think. The New York media is also continuing its blackout of Randy's tax Wall Street candidacy. The city's papers have started mentioning Hydery and Kerry-On as the third-party candidates, as if they are the only third-party candidates. The trend of not mentioning Randy again has already started. The media blackout is really unfair for the voters because New Yorkers should be allowed to know about the alternatives in this race, somebody with vision, and neither of these two others have anything of substance. In fact, one is Webster as unimaginative as the other. So the papers are taking the position, I can already see this as a trend, that they're going to only cover 4 candidates. That's the Democrat, de Blasio, the Republican, Lahota, and the 2 independents, Jack Hydery and Adolfo Kerry-On. There isn't a single candidate besides Randy with a platform that explains how they are going to pay for any of their proposals, unlike the Tax Wall Street Party or the UFAA, where there's an actual economic program to achieve some of the things we'd like to see.
Let me just point out, this Fulani, right? There's a whole history with this, which some people may know. She was allied, still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
She was allied with Fred Newman of a, what can we call it, a psychosexual cult in Greenwich Village. And the word always was that these were people who had used federal matching funds so cleverly that somehow at the end of the process they ended up with owning nice homes in Greenwich Village. So carry on. That doesn't sound like a very good bet.
They called it the Social Therapy Project.
Right,
Webster? Yeah, and then where most of the recruits to their party had to go through their, quote, social therapy.
Which was a flesh pile, right? It was simply a flesh pile, and nobody in his right mind wants anything to do with that. So it is a 5-person race, not 4, and it's up to people of goodwill to get that programmatic alternative, right? Because we're talking tax Wall Street and maintain the social safety net, not the tokenism of de Blasio and his obvious corruption through his sweetheart deals with developers.
Yes. And another interesting tidbit real quick, you know that Jack Hydery, one of the other two that I mentioned, the ones that they're promoting, do you know that he's got his independent jobs and education line, but I found this out last night, he's a registered member of this controversial Independence Party. So the closer you get to this, Webster, the weirder it gets.
So he's a stalking horse for Fulani again.
Yeah, so there's Kerry-On and Hydery. They're both Independence Party members. It's very weird. I don't know if that means anything, but it's just weird. Adolfo Kerry-On is was the former president of the Bronx City Council, and he's Fulani's guy. But Kerry-On's platform is just so dull. Like it's just filled with dull promises and still, Webster, no programmatic solutions to make them a reality. It's becoming a joke now because when he's asked how he's going to fund his promises and his plans to improve the city's transportation and infrastructure, all he says is the funds exist for these improvements. It's becoming a joke among the campaigns. He never goes any further than to say the funds exist. He doesn't.
All right. Daniela, let's assume we've convinced somebody now, right? They're saying, look, this is awful, great city, New York, right, coming out of this nightmare of Giuliani and Bloomberg, right, dictatorship of finance capital, police state, as we saw again, right, shooting at people in Times Square, wounding passersby. Suppose they decide now, I want Credico. He's a programmatic alternative. He's also a protest against this kind of high-handed arrogance. What do they do?
Okay, we have to be very careful not to go back to that place because this whole race is filled with the same cast of characters. But every 2 weeks, we have to file our finances with the New York Campaign Finance Board. We just finished that, and we may be near the middle of the Pact, Webster, but we're the lowest on this finance list. These last 2 days, we raised $835 and spent $789 on ads and flyers. And the other campaign guys, they're raising hundreds of thousands every 2 weeks, and they're laughing at us. not that I care, but I'm amazed at how far we've come considering, this discrepancy in the money. So I'm going to ask people they could, again, to donate to Credico2013.org. And there's a donate button right there on the site. And as usual, please contact me if you want to run in the upcoming 2014 midterm elections or help build the party with us at you can email me at taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com.
I would also add for people thinking of volunteering, right? It's autumn in New York. Autumn in New York, when it gets a little bit cooler, the heat is not so oppressive, right? You get the whole golden October in New York City. This is a chance to do some touring, right? That means something, right? You can come, spend a number of days, part-time, full-time, whatever your preference may be, but get there, right? If I were somebody out there, I would say, okay, UN General Assembly, come into town, great time to be there. Show up next week and do some, go in and you can sit, watch the General Assembly. You can sit there, see these foreign ministers go for a couple of hours, get that idea, then go out and organize for Credico and the Tax Wall Street Party.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you, Webster, for saying that. I don't know how much time we have left. Do you want to hear about either Joe LaHoda or... Very quickly, give
us a profile of this Republican.
LaHoda or Hydery? Okay, first, want to hear a little bit about... The Republican. Okay, so the Republican, Joe LaHoda.
I'm sorry, there it goes.
Oh, okay, am I done? I'll talk to you next week?
Have to wait till next week, but LaHoda is obviously
I'll see you next week,
good.
Webster.
Credico is your man. See you soon, Daniela. Keep up the good work. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So, Credico, we'll have much more about that in the weeks to come. And if you get a chance to go, autumn in New York, great time to be there. And wrapping up on Syria, the way it worked was we had Putin at the Valdai meeting, an international discussion group in Russia. Putin had repeated on Wednesday that the Russian government has every reason to believe that the August 21st chemical weapons attack was a provocation by rebels seeking to implicate Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. We had a Russian deputy foreign minister in Damascus this week, and if you watched that press conference on Russia Today, you will have seen Anhar Kochneva. We were delighted to see Anhar Kochneva, who had spent, 3 months as a captive, a hostage held by these terrorists, and they were going to kill her. They were trying to extort money, and she looks like she has bounced back from that terrible ordeal. But just remember the Pichinin story, right? The Belgian who had spent time also as a captive, heard a general of the Free Syrian Army gloating that the chemical action had been done by the Free Syrian Army, probably by the Farouk Brigade, but specifically by the pro-Western, right? The good terrorists, the moderate cannibals had done this action. Kerry doesn't seem to care about these things. So Putin says it's provocation, and Lavrov had then backed it up. Kerry then had an apoplectic fit on Thursday, saying despite the efforts of some to deny Syrian government responsibility, the UN Security Council must act. Here's Kerry again. We really don't have time today to pretend that anyone can have their own set of facts approaching the use of chemical weapons in Syria. Kerry, where is your proof? You have not submitted proof. You're the new Colin Powell. Sorry, the new Colin Powell. And you have proclaimed this stuff, right? It's an authoritarian. It's ipsa dixit, right? Ipsa in this case being skull and bones Kerry. He says so, right? Aristotle says so. That's no argument in the modern world. Kerry raves on. Sarin gas was used. Sarin killed. The world can decide whether it was used by a regime which has used chemical weapons before. Well, prove that. Or whether the opposition secretly went into territory they don't control, to fire rockets they don't have containing sarin, which they don't possess, to kill their own people. The Turkish courts give you a very documented example, Kerry, of terrorist groups, Nusra in this case, caught in the act, right? Caught in flagrante delicto with 2 kilograms of sarin. So this is the hysteria, right? This is the argument we always get, right? Here's the official version, and if you don't believe it, you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, the Russian government has given new force to the question of false flags, right? That Aleppo was a false flag, that Goutha was a false flag, and that a false flag may be in the works against the Israelis. Now, let's also remember Iran. Rouhani, president of Iran, we're looking at this with benevolent interest. It looks highly interesting. Rouhani's interview with Ann Curry, right? The repudiation of nuclear weapons, the repudiation of verbal excess, which I think is a good step in the right direction. Obviously, Rouhani is concerned. He's going to come to the United Nations. Netanyahu is also coming to the United Nations. So it's time to preempt the Warmonger Act, right? The Geek Act by Netanyahu, the warmonger, in his speech to the General Assembly, when everybody walks out, naturally. So Rouhani is trying to prepare the ground, and there has been this exchange of letters between Rouhani and Obama, and I think that we may be seeing that Obama is following the polls, right, which is what he ought to do in this case, that the American people are absolutely sick of war. All the money, all the arm twisting of AIPAC failed on Syria. Obama was headed for ignominious defeat in the House on the warmonger resolution, ignominious defeat probably also in the Senate. The Israelis are demanding a hard line, right? The Israelis have freaked out in response to the Obama remarks about the opening of diplomatic dialogue with Iran. The Israelis, as always, ready to fight to the last American. The British, the French, the Saudis, the Turks, the Qataris, the Israelis, one thing they disagree about so much, but they're all willing to fight until the last American is gone. Well, we're sick of that, and we want no more of it. Now, let's look at something. Well, there's the domestic front, right? First of all, the negative. The Republicans are threatening to shut down the government again. They want to stop Obamacare. The reason they want to stop Obamacare is simple. Cruz has told us. They know that once people get the idea that they have a right to health care and that there are subsidies and tax breaks to make that happen, the sugar, as Ted Cruz, who is married to Goldman Sachs, says, then it's going to be impossible to roll it back. So the desperation of the Republican position is they're trying to block a reform they know will be popular in many circles. And, of course, there are tremendous problems with Obamacare. But I say, having reached this point, you don't go back. You push forward. You get people into the program, give them a vested interest in the program, then you fight to expand and reform the program from the inside, knock out the death panel aspect, the IMAC, MedPAC people, right, the austerity ghouls, Butcher, Berwick, people like that, get rid of them, and expand it so that you're going in the direction of Medicare for all. The Republicans say no. They want to shut down the government on October 1st, and there's even a kamikaze caucus of Tea Party lunatics, fascists, I would say, who want the United States to default, because that would shut down a lot of borrowing, right? See, they hate the Constitution. Constitution says United States Congress can borrow money. These Republicano-fascists say, no, we don't like that part of the Constitution. Junk that. It's one of the enumerated powers. No, don't like that one. So this is purely arbitrary, right? This is using the Constitution as a kind of a smokescreen. And, of course, it's not a suicide pact either. So a real president at this point would make them cave. Notice they're splitting. The House and the Senate Republicans are splitting. There's a general idea to ostracize and scapegoat Cruz. It's richly deserved. But don't forget little Rand. He's just as bad. We noticed that some libertarian websites this week were upset that David Attenborough of the British wants to cut off all food to the third world so people will die. And they're indignant. Well, they're correct. It's right to be indignant about that. But notice that little Rand Paul and the leprechaun Ron Paul, their proposals to wipe out U.S. foreign aid mean and include wiping out U.S. emergency food aid, which is half of the emergency food aid in the world. That is millions of deaths. That's essentially what Attenborough is calling for. So you don't like genocide coming from Attenborough, but you seem to love genocide coming from little Rand and the leprechaun. So I'm hoping for explanations. But now the Republicans have now voted. It is a narrow vote. It's something like, 218 to 217 to 210? Something like that. Anyway, it's by 4 or 5 votes, right, if you count the crossover effect, to cut $40 billion out of food stamps. That means the Republicans in the House are now on record once and for all. They demand genocide against the American people, because that's the effect. $1.50 per person per meal goes down to 50 cents. That's the Republicans. It's genocide, and we say no. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Remember the commemoration of the Russian fleets, Tuesday, September 24th, 7 p.m., National Press Club, Washington, D.C., with yours truly. An highly interesting evening, I think, shaping up. Now, the Republicans, therefore, attempting to shut down the government and trying to drive the United States into bankruptcy. These are sociopaths. They're split already. A real president would destroy the Republican Party in place at this point. Make them cave, split them into parts, let the two or three factions go whirling off in different directions. Play it from that point of view, right? They're an intolerable threat to civilization in this part of the world. There's no purpose for this party. Once they're gone as a national party, the Democratic Party, you can also see that, would tend to split into 2 parts, right? You've had a rebellion from the Democratic left, I guess we can say, against the Syria war. There's been an uprising of left Democrats against Summers. I think there's an increasing impatience with Obama because he doesn't fight for immigration reform. He doesn't fight for anything. You have to hope that he'll fight for Obama, but that doesn't seem to work. So in this terrible situation, Obama is now going to pick a new head of the Federal Reserve. He's ruled out Summers. Summers has taken himself out. He seems to be going towards Yellen. Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen is a clone of Bernanke, although she does it with a certain amount of left-wing, pro-worker, pro-working people verbiage. It is at this point that I have come forward to offer myself as the next head of the Federal Reserve. If somebody like, if the post of the head of the International Monetary Fund can be sought after by Jeffrey Sachs on the basis of having destroyed Bolivia, destroyed Poland, and destroyed Russia, well, I have the qualifications to be the head of the Federal Reserve. And it's like this. Bernanke has prolonged now the hot money policy, QE3, $85 billion a month. Those are support operations for toxic kited derivatives. Mortgage-backed securities, those are derivatives. This is a policy that only aims at keeping the zombie banks afloat. It's a failure. The hot money policy does not work. It causes weakness of the currency, and it only helps zombie banks. Unfortunately, the Keynesian consumer goods approach, embodied to some extent in the stimulus and the supplemental of 2009, although beneficial in the short run, has not produced a recovery. And once it's gone, it's over. The only way you get a permanent recovery is to stimulate the production of capital goods. There's got to be a capital goods industry recovery in order to get out of the depression. So the hot money doesn't work. The Keynesian stimulus doesn't work. Of course, we have the libertarians, the Paul-tards. They want a deflationary crash to liquidate everything, liquidate jobs, liquidate real estate, liquidate stocks, liquidate bonds, liquidate the farmer, and then hope for a recovery. Too bad if you died. And, of course, very high levels of unemployment, as Peter Schiff confessed on one occasion. My method is different. My method is the Voitinsky, Lautenbach, Hamilton, Carey, Friedrich List, Lend-Lease method. I say there are three kinds of stimulus. There's the fiscal stimulus, right, when you run a deficit, Keynesian method. There's a monetary stimulus where the central bank does what Bernanke is doing now, pump out hot money. And then there's a credit stimulus. Credit stimulus can be of two kinds. It can either go to zombie banks, AIG, money market funds, foreign zombie banks, what have you, or, in my book, it can go to a credit stimulus for infrastructure to actually revive the economy. And that's my program to become the head of the Federal Reserve Board, the governor, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. I will implement a credit stimulus to the amount of $5 trillion initially, but it's open-ended. It will be a revolving credit facility. It's a credit facility that will issue a tender offer to governors, to mayors, to county executives, other officials, regional consortia, the New York Port Authority, New York, New Jersey Port Authority, similar things in other states. And the bonds that will be bought that are the subject of the tender offer will be century bonds, 100-year maturities, 0% coupon, and the proviso is only infrastructure, only rebuilding roads, superhighways, railroads, communication systems, bringing the fastest internet in the world to every nook and cranny of the United States, to maintain communication like the Postal Service, to maintain and expand water projects, canals, ports, electricity grids. That includes thermonuclear fusion power, research, and so forth. In other words, every aspect of infrastructure, hospital establishments, schools, libraries, public buildings, university buildings, and so forth, all included. It's a combination of the Works Progress Administration of Harry Hopkins, the Public Works Administration of Harold Ickes, Lend-Lease, run primarily by Harry Hopkins, with the experience of the Voitinsky-Lautenbach proposals in Germany of 1931, 1932, which would have avoided the fascist seizure of power and the World War. So it's a promise to the American people to create a recovery. 30 million jobs within, I would say, 18 months. We'll have to refine that timetable a little bit, but that is obviously within reach. And one of the reasons it is because of the lawlessness of the current system. This can be done without reference to Congress, without reference to anybody. Once you get in, once you're the governor of the Federal Reserve, and if you can carry enough votes on the open market committee and so forth, you can create a credit facility. And again, it's not fiscal, it's not deficit spending, it's not monetary, it's not hot money of the QE3 kind. It's a credit stimulus. They put out a tender offer. The governors come forward with their zero-coupon century bonds and the coast-to-coast maglev. We should probably have 3 coast-to-coast maglevs, right? North, center, and south. We've got to have coastal maglevs. We've got to have the Gulf to Texas maglev, the Texas T-bone, the raising of the highways in Louisiana, the building of the anti-Katrina blockage in New Orleans, the anti-Superstorm Sandy in the New York area, and so on down the line. That's 30 million new jobs and a real economic recovery available anytime you have the political guts to do it. So that's my platform. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. So if you want 30 million new productive jobs at union pay scales under the Davis-Bacon Act, put me in the Federal Reserve as the governor, head of the Board of Governors, and I will do anything one person can do, including appeal to the public, appeal to the Congress, anything necessary to get that done. And remember, you don't need the Congress to get it done, right? Bernanke created about a dozen credit facilities during the crash. AIG still has one only for itself, Maiden Lane. That's a credit facility for AIG and only for AIG. So we say $5 trillion, 100-year bonds, 0% coupon, infrastructure only. That gets your entire array of high technology, high capital intensity, modern capital goods production going. Now, let's look at another problem. A tremendous problem has occurred now for the entire reactionary world. 50 years ago, when Paul VI Montini was starting off as Pope, he engaged in what were called gesti prophetici, prophetic gestures, which captured the attention of the world. He was concerned with stopping the war in Vietnam and similar things. He was interested in stopping famines in the Third World. He was looking at the big issues. Now we have the celebrated interview of Francis I Bergoglio with 16 or 17 different Jesuit magazines across the world. America is the one it's published in here. And here he says, I have never been a right-winger. I'm not a right-winger. The Roman Catholic Church, with 1 billion plus followers, the largest single religious institution in the world, is taking a sharp left turn. Hallelujah. Just what the world needed. The Pope's interview warns that there's been a reduction, a practice of reductionism of the Christian faith to a series of points. Let him speak for himself. The dogmatic and moral teachings of the church are not all equivalent. They're not all at the same level. The church's pastoral ministry, taking care of souls, cannot be obsessed with the transmission of a disjointed multitude of doctrines to be imposed insistently. Proclamation in a missionary style, right, prophetic gestures, focuses on the essentials, on the necessary things. This is what fascinates and attracts people. What makes the heart burn? Well, no, the heart reach out as it did for the disciples at Emmaus. We have to find a new balance. Otherwise, even the moral, and let's get this, we have to find a new balance. Otherwise, even the moral edifice of the church is likely to fall like a house of cards, losing the freshness and fragrance of the gospel. The proposal of the gospel must be more simple, profound, radiant. It is from this proposition that the moral consequences then flow. So he's saying, don't harp on gays, abortion, contraception, and similar sexual issues. Now, of course, this puts him on a collision course with the reactionary forces in the Roman Catholic Church, right? They have boiled the faith down to being against abortion, right? That's essentially what it comes down to. You could be a mass murderer. You could be a Bush, and they would embrace you. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, I would say, in Dante terms, they have sold out Christ in favor of an alliance with the Republican Party. And, of course, they had to be softened up with the various pedophile scandals to get there. But nevertheless, the fact is they did it. They betrayed the faith. So don't be obsessed by that. And you can see what this Pope is concerned about. He's concerned about anti-war. He had a whole day of activism against the Syrian war, and he's obviously concerned about poverty and exclusion, and this includes everybody. Getting prisoners, getting Muslim women prisoners to wash their feet at St. John Lateran on Maundy Thursday. So this is charity. This is a renaissance, as I tried to point out in my speech down on the Mall and also other occasions, starting with the Interreligious Conference in Khartoum 20 years ago now. Charity, that's the basis of a convergence with Muslim social solidarity, with Confucian benevolence, with the Hindu charity that we find going back to the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, the charity taught by Theravada Buddhism especially, and the charity, the tzedakah that is taught in Judaism as a means to reestablish the proper equilibrium of the material world. Remember, there's faith, hope, and charity, and the greatest is charity. Now, we might add, where did this obsession with gays, abortion, contraception come from? It is a right-wing conception, right? Especially under Marshal Pétain and Franco in Spain. For decades, right, you had this idea that the main problems are not public policy problems, right? Poverty is not a mass problem, but it's the sins of the individual. In other words, it knocks you back on a defensive posture where some Jeremiah is telling you that you have sinned and so forth. Well, of course you've sinned, but the idea that this is the basis of it, right, this sort of vindictive stuff. I'm afraid also contained in this interview is a rebuke to Ratzinger, Benedict the 16th, right, with his cape and his special Gucci shoes or whatever he had. This was not what we needed in the times. This was a holy pedant who couldn't resist citing some Byzantine emperor telling us that Islam was not good and getting himself into a totally useless, pointless confrontation with the world of Islam over that piece of nonsense, right? Pedantry cannot do the job. Now, who loses here? I'll tell you who loses. The Republican Party loses big once again, and it couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of guys. The same Republicans who are voting to cut food stamps are going to run into the buzzsaw of this revolution in world public opinion. The social conservatives have built their house on bigotry. They've built their house on the denial of charity, right? They have no charity in their doctrine, and they're obsessed, gays, homosexuals, in other words, wedge issues. The Catholic Church, or any church, cannot be based on wedge issues, and that is what the Pétain, Franco, Salazar, and indeed Mussolini focused on, this individual sexual morality comes down to. So I would say right now the Republicans, their flank is in the air. They're being enveloped. The social conservative part of them is doomed because it was based on the idea that you'd have an alliance between the Protestant social conservative bigots and their opposite numbers on the Catholic side. Well, the Catholic side is now going to fall away. There will be a struggle. You can imagine, what is O'Reilly going to say next week? What is Hannity going to say? Maybe not even next week, maybe tonight. What are they going to say to a pope who says, I'm not a right-winger. I believe in charity. I don't believe in this obsession. He also has some other interesting things. He likes opera. He likes Mozart. He likes to read Dostoevsky, a nod to the Russians. You cannot reduce the magisterium to one issue. There's also an implication here for Judaism, right? You cannot boil the world of Judaism down to one thing, a secular historical event like the Holocaust. That won't work either. So there's now pressure, I think, on Judaism to revive. But the main thrust of this goes against the reactionary Republicans of the social reactionary type. So we'll be looking at that, and we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So the Pope says, if the Christian is a restorationist, a legalist, if he wants everything clear, clean, and safe, then he will find nothing. And he even cites Puccini's opera Turandot, right? The various riddles, and he recommends optimism, ultimately. Optimism, he wants to call it hope, but optimism. So this is a gold mine, and again, you can see who loses, right? The vindictive, reactionary forces. The purpose of the church has got to be, among other things, not to blame everything on the sins of the little people, but not to duck out of the confrontation with the rich, the powerful, and the evil. That is the true task. So now let's try to do what we can here in our last segment with the Chickamauga anniversary. Today, the anniversary of Thomas's famous stand on the second day of Chickamauga, the Rock of Chickamauga, holding off an army with a single disorganized army corps. But let's also put it in the context of the Russophobia. The Russian fleet arrived 150 years ago, Tuesday, right? After the casualties of Gettysburg, after the victory of Vicksburg, but after the draft riots and then the horrors of Chickamauga, the Russian fleet arrives in New York. October 12th arrives in San Francisco. And this was a tremendous morale uplift. It is the only example of a foreign state providing direct military assistance and political diplomatic support to the United States, to Lincoln, in the course of this. And there were weeks and weeks of celebration. You go look in Harper's Weekly, Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper, and the rest of them, the Russian officers were lionized. We even have an engraving of the Russian ball, the dance that was held at the Academy of Music. And this was done by a young artist, Winslow Homer, right, who went on to do all those paintings. Some of them are still in the museum there at Phillips Academy in Andover. This was the reality. And when we came out of the Civil War, the policy, the orientation of most Americans was the United States was friendly to Russia because of these fleets. The fleets came with orders that if the British and the French attacked the United States and or Russia, these fleets would go into action, raiding British and French commerce in the same way that the Alabama and the other Confederate commerce raiders had done. They would have exacted a terrible toll. This gave the British pause. So that is the pro-Russian attitude, was that the Tsar had said to the British and the French already in the fall of 1862, if you interfere in the American Civil War, I will accept that as casus belli for Russia. And the fleets might have been modest compared to the British one, but there were also these huge land armies. And make no mistake, the British realized what those armies could do in a place like India, putting a quick end to the British Empire. There was also a heritage of sympathy to Prussia because of the ability of Prussia to pin down Napoleon III, keep the French troops along the Rhine, don't let them go to Mexico, and also the willingness of German savers, right, just German people, to buy United States government bonds. So the alignment was U.S., Russia, Prussia against colonialists, British, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Austria-Hungary. Italy, by the way, Italy might have gone with the U.S., Russia, Prussia because of the Italian and Prussian convergence against Austria-Hungary. But if it had been U.S., Russia, Prussia, maybe Italy, no World War I, no World War II. You can't have it unless you can't have a world war unless you've got Russia and Germany on different sides. Ask King Edward VII. That's what he knew. That's what he acted on. So it was Admiral Lisowski and his fleet that came into New York Harbor on Tuesday, and that's what we'll be marking. Now, I'm ashamed. The Russophobia of the U.S. media and elites is disgusting. This morning on Diane Rehm, we had the international panel, oh, can we trust Putin? How about can you trust Kerry, who is a liar? Right? He was pointed out by Putin and Lavrov that he's a liar, and they're right. He's a liar. He also lied about his position on Iraq. They didn't seem to notice that, but I did. Chris Hayes and Matt Taibbi, another disgusting exercise. Two cretins. They showed a series of pictures of animals which they claimed looked like Putin. You want to get into that game and start doing that to your shibboleths and poobahs? You won't like it. And in particular, this guy Taibbi is a grinning snake oil salesman, hypocrite, who's going to grin and tell us about how bad Russia is. Come on, you're supposed to know that the U.S. is run by a vampire squid, and you're hostile to the Russians. I would thank Stephen Cohen for his remarks, right? The United States, these left liberals, should thank Putin for helping to avoid a disastrous war and the ignominious collapse of the Obama administration through Obama's own stupidity, ineptitude, and cowardice, rather than blaming Putin. But now, let's see if we have a little bit of time. Concerning two individual Russians, let me point out, Charles d'Arnaud, A-R-N-A-U-D, was an advisor to John C. Fremont, who at the beginning in 1861 was the Union commander in the West, and to Grant. Lincoln, you'll remember, Lincoln had said, if the Confederates get an army into Illinois in 1861, that will lead to British-French recognition. Now, the Confederates had a couple of defense lines. First, they wanted to do the Ohio River, including Belmont, Kentucky, where there are bluffs, kind of like Vicksburg. And then they had to fall back on Island Number 10, Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, and Mill Spring. Grant was operating out of Cairo, Illinois. So this guy, d'Arnaud, experienced Russian officer, engineer, and spy, did a kind of subterranean, surreptitious trip all around Kentucky and Tennessee. And he came back and he said to Grant, do one thing, seize Paducah, Kentucky. This is where the Tennessee River and a little bit further on the Cumberland River go into the Ohio River. You take those two, you've got a direct water line down into Alabama, and that is what they did. So it was this guy, d'Arnaud, who sets up Grant to take Paducah, to wreck the Ohio River line of Jefferson Davis and Leonidas Polk, and then send the gunboats down all the way into Alabama, freaking out the Confederates. It meant that the war was transferred out of Illinois and into Confederate-held territory. This means that d'Arnaud, and Grant says so in his memoirs, was key in setting up Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, which is how Grant made his name. So we can say that Charles d'Arnaud is instrumental in helping Grant launch his career. How about that? Grant comes to you thanks to a Russian advisor. Here's another one, and this applies especially to Chickamauga today. General John Basil Turchin, Don Cossack, veteran of the Crimean War, exponent of total war. He wants liberating of the slaves, and he pioneers the technique used by Sherman of economic warfare, right? Destroy assets. So at the Battle of Chickamauga, there are two separate moments where the Confederates are threatening to break through, and it's a counterattack by Turchin's brigade that prevents the Confederates from breaking through. We can say that without Turchin, George Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga, and probably the greatest tactician of the entire war on any side, Thomas became the Rock of Chickamauga thanks to help from Turchin. We can go into that in detail. And then at the Battle of Missionary Ridge, Chattanooga, in November of 1864, we've got 18, a little bit, 2 months after Chickamauga in any case. Turchin is the guy who leads the Union charge up this tremendous mountain and takes the day. And that's what got Grant his final promotion to head the Army of the Potomac. This is November 1863. So 2 Russians helped make Grant and Thomas what they were. So worth pondering. We'll be back next week on World Crisis Radio. See you Tuesday evening at the National Press Club, the anniversary of the Russian fleets. And don't forget, Tarpley for Fedhead. Tarpley for Fedhead. Proper international authority, the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, which is located in The Hague, the Netherlands, right? Den Haag. So the Syrians have met the deadline. That's important because otherwise Mad Dog Kerry, foaming at the mouth, would be capable of demanding a world war as the price for missing the deadline. So he won't get that chance. And now, of course, the attention of the world shifts to New York, to the United Nations. Next week, starting on Monday and Tuesday, we're going to have the annual session of the United Nations General Assembly. This is bad for the imperialists. You're going to get a lot of ambassadors. You're going to get a lot of diplomats, envoys, talking, and this ugly, aggressive, imperialistic, neo-colonialist line emanating from London and Paris, the Suez powers of 1956, the Sykes-Picot powers of World War I, dragging the United States in there as the tail on the Anglo-French kite. And I think that's going to generate a moment of revulsion and rejection in world public opinion against this absurd neo-colonialist enterprise. We'll even talk about the attempts of the Kerry State Department to harass representatives of sovereign states getting in there, right? The Kerry State Department is trying to prevent the Venezuelan foreign minister from coming with harassment. Look how low this Kerry, this mad dog from Skull and Bones, is willing to stoop. Why is he still in office? He should have been fired, impeached long ago. Naturally, he's so shameless, he'll never resign. He's got to be ousted and sent back to his windsurfing. So, welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. The world strategic ideological picture is in motion. The crust of a quarter century is breaking apart, and we've got important moves on the Russian front, on the Vatican front, and in other forms that indicate that there are openings for hope and action in the current world. And as we speak to you, it's the 150th anniversary of the second day of the Great Battle of Chickamauga in northwest Georgia. That is the second most costly battle of the entire Civil War. It is second only to Gettysburg a couple of months earlier. And it is, of course, out of this battle that we get George H. Thomas of Virginia, a loyal Virginian, who won the title of the Rock of Chickamauga. He later went on to become the Sledgehammer of Nashville, destroying Hood's army on the battlefield. And the interesting angle, as so often in the Civil War, on his way to becoming the Rock of Chickamauga, Thomas got help from a Russian general, a Don Cossack in his army. That is General John Basil Turchin, a veteran of the Crimean War who had come to the United States and who saved the day not once but twice at Chickamauga with well-placed counterattacks. And he can be for things before he's against them. Anyway, enough of Kerry Skull and Bones. That is now coming. And, of course, the big issue now basically revolves around the United Nations Security Council resolution, which the U.S. and France and Britain seem to think is needed in this case. I don't see how it's needed. It's not needed because the attempt here is obviously to create a veil of legality and legitimacy for something that remains a policy of the threat of force, which violates all sorts of treaties, right? The United States is violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nuclear states are not allowed to threaten non-nuclear states. You're violating your own anti-proliferation regime. Don't look now, State Department. So that's going on. There is no need for a resolution. If resolution there must be for tactical reasons, the main imperative is no reference to Chapter 7, nothing about threats to international peace and security that have got to be answered by military action and or further killer economic sanctions. In other words, the enforcement mechanism cannot be provided in the resolution. And actually, of course, the U.S. is always making threats off stage, right? Give us what we want or we'll attack, we'll bomb. That is probably less realistic now that Obama has faced the gaping abyss of a humiliating defeat in the House and in the Senate, too. But still, there's an attempt now to cover that over by getting back to military action through the back door. All of these people, Kerry, Susan Rice, Samantha Power, fire every one of them. They're failures. They're amateurs. They're bunglers. Compared to Lavrov. Lavrov looks like the new Richelieu. And that, of course, leads us into the anniversary next Tuesday, September 24th. It is the 150th anniversary of the arrival of the Russian fleet in New York City, just in time after that terrible summer of Gettysburg, Vicksburg, the draft riots, and then Chickamauga. Terrible casualties in all of those, or most of those events, Gettysburg and Chickamauga especially. And it was then at the moment when things seemed pretty dark that the Russian fleet arrived, causing U.S. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles to say, "Thank God for the Russians. God bless the Russians," literally. So the debt of honor will be acknowledged, and that will occur at the National Press Club on the evening, the precise anniversary of Tuesday, September 24th, and that will be at 7 p.m. in the evening. So if you're anywhere near Washington, D.C., please come. Please make a tape. Put it on the Internet. We're going to need that. So that is the current overview. Now, we've got to look, first of all, at the struggles around Syria. As of this morning, the Syrian government has met the somewhat artificial but deadline of 1 week from the meeting, the Kerry-Lavrov meeting in Geneva last Saturday. They have met that with time to spare. They have delivered a report outlining, giving an overview of the Syrian chemical weapons, poison gas arsenal. And they have delivered this not to Mad Dog Kerry of Skull and Bones, but to the prosecutor, and these people look like absolute bunglers. And then the central issue then becomes, as part of that struggle, who, pray tell, used the nuclear weapons? Now, here in the land of the direct apologetic, we might say, it's simply lying, right? The U.S. just lies. Obama was on the radio a week ago saying that nobody out there in the world believes that the rebels used nuclear weapons. Well, no, it looks to me like the biggest country of landmass, Russia, and the biggest country by population, they seem to think that there's something to that. And we've got in the paper this morning the U.S.-Russian agreement on Syria's chemical weapons on shaky ground Thursday the 19th of September, i.e. yesterday, because Kerry says there are efforts by some to deny Syrian government responsibility. We'll be back to elaborate on that in just a second. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., reminding you that the 150th anniversary of the visit of the Russian fleet to New York Harbor will be marked and commemorated, and gratitude expressed on Tuesday, September 24th at 7 p.m. at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on 14th Street, not so far from the U.S. Treasury. You can find it. Metro Center. So will there be a UN Security Council resolution? Strictly speaking, not needed, but no Chapter 7. Don't let the imperialists and colonialists and aggressors get what they couldn't get from their own national parliaments, which is some veneer